The FDA has been in the news a lot this year, but one headline you may have missed is about to cause a big shakeup to the pharmaceutical industry and consumers alike. In April, the agency announced its historic move to replace animal testing in the development of certain medications. Animal testing has long been a requirement for new drugs to show a product's safety and efficacy before using it on humans.
This includes all sorts of toxicity studies, looking at what happens in the liver, looking at what happens on the skin. For some of the shorter dose toxicity studies, we're talking about acute toxicities. Animals are used in new drugs. It's been dogs, monkeys, mice, and rats are used most often, but you also have rabbits and you have pigs, guinea pigs, and other animals, forcing them to inhale chemicals and seeing what happens to them and killing them. I think people have a bit of maybe a fairy tale idea about it because they're being misled, because the truth is so ugly.
That's Elizabeth Baker, Director of Research Policy for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. There are several downsides to animal testing that Baker identifies, the first being that animals simply aren't a good stand-in for humans.
What has happened for a long time is these animals are used. They go through all sorts of horrible things. These are painful and deadly experiments. And then we're really crossing our fingers and hoping that it's going to translate. But there are so many differences among species. So you have differences in biology and disease characteristics and how we metabolize drugs in our lifespan. And those differences really lead to these translational issues. One, I think, really striking statistic is that over 90% of drugs are going to fail in humans after they pass the animal studies.
According to the FDA's roadmap to reducing animal testing in preclinical safety studies, they've also been historically poor predictors of drug success for inflammatory diseases, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. And on the opposite end, some drugs that are safe for humans, like aspirin, would have never passed animal testing. A second downside to this process is the cost. As you can imagine, this can be a very lengthy and expensive process for companies. A Deloitte report estimates that the average cost of bringing a new drug to market is just over $2 billion.
You have those costs of directly paying for the animal tests. You also have the cost of failure. So companies invest so much to get to the point where they are testing in humans in clinical trials and they're failing. And so as companies can use more predictive for humans methods earlier in that process, they can weed out more quickly which products are going to fail when they move into humans. And then they can also make better decisions about which products to move forward that are going to be safer for people, that are more likely to work in humans.
It's no surprise that another issue with animal testing is the ethical implications that come with many of these studies.
Dogs, just like the dogs that we have in our homes and we love, they're no different than those dogs. They are used in unthinkable ways. They have a gavage, which is essentially a tube that goes down their throat, pumps their stomach full of chemicals. And these tests will continue until half the animals die. It's truly terrible.
One final issue that Baker notes with the industry's continued use of animal testing is that it's failed to evolve in a meaningful way. As every other industry has reshaped the public's view of products from cars to cereal, Baker says the FDA's testing requirements continue to be stuck in the past.
When it comes to the tests that companies are using in regulatory decision-making and that the FDA is assessing to make its decisions about what drugs should be approved, same tests from the 1950s. So it's really shocking that the process has boxed out innovation so much. But even despite that, there has been a lot of innovation in the methods that exist. They're just not at all used to their potential. And so this type of strong leadership from the agency saying, we're going to phase this out, we're going to do things differently, is really welcome, because there are these methods that exist now. And then, of course, there's many more that are going to be developed now that the agency has signaled it's ready for more innovation.
The FDA's plan to phase out animal testing leans heavily on the expectation that the industry will replace it with artificial intelligence and human-based lab models.
There are replacements for those that exist that don't use animals at all, that are actually better science. These are tissue-based models where you essentially take a human skin cell, and those can be grown into reconstructed human tissues, and you can just test directly on those tissues as well. So that's just one example of a replacement of one of the typical animal tests.
Using human-based models means that all of the tests will inherently be directly relevant to humans, allowing scientists to avoid those translational issues that occur when using animals. Another emerging technology is called organ chips, which offer a more accurate way to predict drug behavior.
Organ chips, I think one way to think of them is they're essentially platforms where human cells are seated and they are engineered to mimic the structure and the function of those human organs. And so the products can be tested right there on those chips. And then the chips can be linked together to form different systems within the body.
These lab-based tests are expected to revolutionize our research and development methods. But they're not the only exciting technology on the horizon. Scientists have created AI programs that can replace some forms of animal testing through mathematical predictions.
We used to require an animal test for this purpose. Well, we've been able to do the mathematical simulations, and we have realized we don't need to do a test. So a waiver would be one thing that it can help with, but the other would be using machine learning and AI to analyze the structures of drugs and to link it to known clinical outcomes, and then also to predict those toxicities. So the things we talked about, like force feeding animals these huge amounts of chemicals and then killing them to see how it affected their liver or their heart. The idea is that AI would be able to predict these things in humans, so you can leave the animals out of it altogether.
Some of these models are already up and running in labs today. But while there seems to be overall support for this move by the FDA across industries, one main pushback to getting rid of animal testing is the idea that we'll no longer get a whole system view. Animal models allow us to see how a therapy will affect multiple systems throughout the body. However, Baker argues that we have years of data to show just how unreliable these results can be, which means that even though it offers a whole system view, that doesn't mean we can get any real conclusions from it. Additionally, researchers can use some of the human-based models together to create a similar, more accurate picture.
The organ chips that I mentioned, where they can be connected to form the body systems, these are called microphysiological systems. And the goal is to be able to pick up these things that would happen in a system. But also when you're adding in the complex biological modeling of human systems, that is the other way that we're going to address it, with information that is actually relevant to humans. So I understand the concern, and I think we're going to get there with these methods because of the human relevance. That is the focus of where things are going.
That's not to say that this will be an easy transition. Not only have countless funds been invested into building infrastructure for animal research, but there are entire industries of people who have trained for and work with these methods every day.
They have a lot of confidence in them because they've been using them for years. Maybe they don't know how to utilize all of these human-based approaches. So there's definitely a training component to that. You have policies that in the past have required or favored animal tests. And so you have your regulatory affairs folks within companies who are used to seeing a package of information that they know the FDA is going to accept. You have the reviewers within the agency who are looking for certain things to be included. And so all of those things are going to need to be addressed, but they are being addressed in the plan. So I think what's so great about what has happened at the FDA is that the FDA is saying we have a goal and we have a plan, and the plan is comprehensive. So the plan gets into all of those things. It addresses the need to change the policies. It addresses the need for culture change and is really taking that on. It importantly encourages companies to right now begin. A lot of companies are using these methods, but they're not submitting the information to the agency. They're asking for them to start doing that now.
Currently, the FDA's announcement states that these actions will be taken for the development of monoclonal antibody therapies and other drugs. It's not specified what the other drugs will be, but monoclonal antibody therapies are used as targeted drug treatments for cancer, autoimmune diseases, and infectious diseases.
I think the way to think about this is the intention is a phase out of all animal testing for drugs, but they're starting with monoclonal antibodies as just the type of drug that's a case study to get things going that then will be applied to other drug classes. I think what we have seen in the last several years in terms of the modern innovative approaches are all focusing on human biology. And the writing for toxicology testing, the writing is on the wall. What has happened in toxicology has been so exciting to see all this innovation. And now it is branching out. Those successes are affecting other areas of research and testing as well. So I believe we will see a future that is animal-free.
The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America is a trade group that represents the nation's leading biopharmaceutical research companies. Though they declined an interview for this segment, they told our producer, quote, "We are pleased to see this initial announcement of FDA's plans to phase out certain animal testing and are looking forward to more details to understand how this might further expedite drug development," unquote. You can find more information about Elizabeth Baker and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zavari. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.